Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Memhei Amud Beis 45b of Maseches Kiddushin. We are starting 6 lines down on the page. The first word on the line is Ushmuel, and the second word is Hahu. So that's where we're going from. The Gemara says, Hahu Gavra de Kaddish Bekisha de Yarka Beshuka. There was a fellow who was Mekadesh, a minor. So again, we've been talking about cases where a man gives Kiddushin, betrothes a child, and sort of the issue or the question would be whether the father approves of it or not. And if her father approves, then it could be Kiddushin. So this man, he was Mekadesh, a girl, a minor, in the shuk, in the marketplace, and he gave her, for the Kiddushin, a kisha de yarka, like a bundle of vegetables. So he took like some Brussels sprouts or something, and he said to her, Aret mekudeshesli, with Brussels sprout zu, and gave it to her. So what's the halacha? So, now, had it been like a normal Kiddushin, like they were at a wedding hall and he gave her a ring, but let's say the father didn't know about it. So and then we already discussed, we had a machlokas, we had a dispute, whether we're concerned that the father will approve of it or not. So that's in the normal situation. So, and there was an opinion that was concerned that maybe the father will approve and it's a good Kiddushin. So what about over here? So Amar Ravina says, Afilu leman damar choshishin shemen esrat zahav. Even according to the opinion that in a normal case says that we're concerned maybe the father approved and it would be a good Kiddushin, that would not be the case here. Because Hani Mili Derech Kavod. That's true. Where are we concerned that the father may approve it? That's if it was done in a kavadika way, in an honorable way. However, Aval Derech Bizayon, but if it's done in a disgraceful way, low. So then there's no consideration. Nobody would hold that the father would approve. And in this case, where he gave her a stock of vegetables, a bundle of vegetables in the marketplace, that's disgraceful. That's not an honorable way to give Kiddushin, and therefore there's no question the father would not approve. So that was what Ravina said. So Amar le Ravacha midifti le Ravina. So Ravacha of Difti said to Ravina, Bizayon demai. In this case, what was the disgrace? What point was it that made it disgraceful that you're describing, that you said in this case, there's no question the father would not approve? I bizayon de yarka. Is the bizayon, is the disgracefulness a result of using vegetables? Because how can you give Kiddushin with vegetables? I bizayon de shuka. Or is the issue what makes it disgraceful that it was in the marketplace? Just a public space like that, it's not a place to have a wedding, to have a Kiddushin. So, what's the difference? What would be the difference? What's the bizayon? Which part of it was disgraceful? Nafkamina, the practical difference is de kaddish bekaspa b'shuka. What would be if he gave money, or we could use a more modern example, a ring like we use. What if he gave money or a ring, but he just did it in the marketplace? So what he gave was presentable. It was done in this public place. Is that also a bizayon? Is that disgraceful? Would we say that the father would never approve of that? Oh, bikisha diyarka bevesa. Or what if he gave her vegetables, but he did it in a house, in a nice, proper place? Is that a bizayon? Which aspect of this Kiddushin made it a bizayon? Was it the vegetables or was it the marketplace? So what's the din? What would be the din? What would be the halacha in those two scenarios where we had one, not the other? We had we had money in the marketplace or vegetables in a house or a wedding hall, to make it even more respectable. So Amarle, so Ravina said, Idi ve'idi derech bizayon. They're both bizayon. They're both disgraceful, and either way, it would never be a Kiddushin. The father would never approve. So whether it was done with vegetables in a respectful place, or it was done with money in a disrespectful, in a disgraceful place, in a marketplace, it doesn't matter. either way, we would never consider that the father would approve of that. In this case, it happened to have both things. It was the ultimate disgraceful Kiddushin. Certainly the father would not approve of it. We are not concerned that this is a good Kiddushin. Okay, the Gemara now has another story. Hahu de Amar, there was a man, a husband, who said regarding his young daughter, Likrivai, she should marry my karov, my relative. So the father wanted his daughter to marry his own relative. Vihi Amra, and she, meaning the mother, his wife, said, Likriva, that she should marry her relative, meaning my relative. So the father wanted the daughter to marry his relative, and the mother wanted the daughter to marry her relative. Kafte ad amar la tihave likriva. The mother pressured the father until he agreed, fine, our daughter can marry your relative, fine. So they made the shidduch, they made the preparations for the wedding, they came to the wedding and they were eating the smorgasbord. They were having some before the actual Kiddushin, they were eating ad achli v'shasi. So while they were eating and drinking in preparation for the Kiddushin, asa krivei be'igra v'kidsha, the relative of the husband, of the father, who was not supposed to be the one to marry this girl, came and gave the girl Kiddushin on the roof, somewhere, out of sight, where they didn't realize, and all of a sudden, the wedding party, the plans seemed to be changing. So this was not the man that was supposed to marry her, but he gave her Kiddushin, she accepted it. So, what do we do in that case? Do we say, listen, that's the person who the father wanted her to marry. When he hears about it, he's going to approve, and it's going to be a Kiddushin. Or not, or do we not say that? So Amar Abaye says, Ksiv, the pasuk says in Safania, it says, She'iris Yisrael lo yasu avla, the remnants of Israel will not do an avla, will not act crookedly, v'lo yidabru chazav, and they won't speak lies. In other words, says Abaye, the father may have wanted his relative to marry the daughter, but he's not going to go back on his word. And once he agreed that his wife's relative can marry the daughter, so even if the opportunity presents itself for his relative, the relative went ahead and gave Kiddushin, we're not concerned the father will approve. A person doesn't, we're not concerned he'll go back on his word. And so we do not consider the Kiddushin, again, we're talking about where the girl was a minor. We don't consider the Kiddushin of the husband, of the father's relative, to be a Kiddushin here. Rava says a different reason why it's not a Kiddushin. A different reason why the father would not change his mind. Chazaka ein adam toreach besuda umafsida. We have a chazaka. We have a chazaka is like an assumption that a person would not put in effort for a meal and then throw it all away. Meaning here, he spent money on this wedding, and if it's not clear to me why they can't just switch who the wedding's for, but it seems that that's not how it would be looked at. If he would allow his relative to marry his daughter, then all the whole wedding would be called off. All the money that he spent, maybe it would be the wrong guests, right? The guests maybe on his side are the right guests, but on the man's side, it's all the wrong guests. So you have to do it all over again. You have to spend money. We assume that a person would not make a big party and then just allow it to go to waste. So therefore, we can assume that the father did not approve of the Kiddushin of his relative. My Beinai, what will be the difference between these two reasons? Abaye had said the reason was because the person doesn't go back on his word, and he said that she would marry the wife's relative. And Rava said the reason is because he doesn't want to waste his suda. So what's the difference? What will be a practical difference? The practical difference is if he didn't put in any effort or money to make a meal. So if they let's say they didn't make a wedding meal, they were just doing small backyard with 3 guests, whatever, right? Without anything fancy, he didn't put in any effort. So then along came the relative, his relative, and gave the Kiddushin. So according to Rava there, maybe we have to be concerned that the father approved of it, because after all, that's who he wanted. And you can't say a person doesn't put in effort and then have it all canceled because he didn't put in any effort. So according to Rava, we have to be concerned for that Kiddushin. According to Abaye, no. Abaye said a person doesn't go back on his word. And therefore, if he said that she's going to marry his wife's relative, then he's not going to go back on that. We're not concerned he'll approve of the Kiddushin done by his own relative. Okay. The Gemara now continues with the new case of the 2 dots. It says, and we're still talking about a minor, a young girl here, Niskatsha l'dasavia. Let's say she got Kiddushin, she accepted Kiddushin with her father's agreement. So this seems to have what it takes to be a Kiddushin. The father approved of it. That would be a Kiddushin d'oraisa, a Kiddushin on a Torah level. It's approved by the father. But there's not yet Nisuin. They're not yet married. They have betrothal. They don't have the second step yet of Nisuin. V'halach avia l'medina sayam. And then the father went traveling to another country, overseas. Ve'amda v'nises. And the daughter, meanwhile, this minor, went and got up and got married. Meaning they had a wedding, they consummated the marriage, either with chuppah or with bia, with intercourse, whatever they did something to that would qualify, yichud, right, qualify as the second step of a marriage process, to go from just kiddushin to nisuin, from betrothal to full marriage. And they did this, but the father was not there to approve of it. So he approved of the kiddushin, but he didn't approve of the nisuin, of the marriage. So, Amarav, so let's say the husband, in this case, of this girl, was a Kohen. So, since he's a Kohen, he's allowed to eat from Truma, from the holy, consecrated grain, bread. If she is fully married to him, then she's also allowed to eat Truma. But if she's just an Arusa, if she's just betrothed, then Midoraisa, according to Torah law, she is allowed to eat Truma, but Midorabanan, rabbinically, she's not allowed to eat Truma. We had this, I think, earlier in the Masechta. I believe that we said the concern is that she might share it with her family, so who are not allowed to eat Truma, because she's not yet fully ensconced in her husband's home. She's just betrothed, so she might take some back to her family and share it. So Midorabanan, she's not allowed to eat Truma. That was one reason. That was the main reason, if I recall correctly. But anyways, Midoraisa, she would be allowed, but Midorabanan, she's not allowed to eat Truma. So in this case, she had a full Erusin, right? The father was there to approve of her Erusin, of her betrothal. But he's not there to approve of the Nisuin. So we don't know, we need his agreement for it to become a full-fledged Nisuin. So, would she be allowed to now eat Truma? Midorabanan, again, rabbinically, she's not allowed to if it's just Erusin. If it's upgraded to Nisuin, to a full marriage, then she's allowed to now. So, in this case, where she did it without her father's approval, because he's away, is she allowed to eat Truma? Says the Gemara, Amarav, Rav said, Ochelas b'Truma. She's allowed to eat Truma at sheyavo aviyah v'yimcha, until her father comes back and protests. If he protests the marriage, then she has to stop eating Truma. That shows us that that this wasn't a good marriage. If he does not protest, then that means the Nisuin, the marriage, was good, retroactively from when it occurred. So Rav says she's allowed to eat Truma. Ravasi Amar Eino Ochelas. Ravasi says she's not allowed to eat. Why? Shema Yavo Aviyah v'Yimcha. Because we're concerned that her father will come and he'll protest and he'll reject the marriage, and Nimses Zara Ochalas B'Truma L'Mafreya. It will turn out that a non-Kohen girl, meaning she's not married to a Kohen, because her father rejected the marriage, and she was eating from Truma retroactively, and that's a problem. So again, Rav said she could eat it, again, we should keep in mind that at worst it would be a rabbinic transgression, because as an arusa, as someone who's betrothed by Torah law, she is allowed to eat the truma. So Rav says, even though midirabanan she's not allowed to, but if she goes and gets a nisuin, she gets fully married, even though there could be a concern that retroactively it'll turn out she was never married because the father might reject it, Rav's not concerned about that. He says, in the meanwhile, we'll allow her to eat truma, and Rav Asi said that she may not. Hava uvda. This case actually played itself out one time, meaning the father accepted Kiddushin from a Kohen for his daughter, then the father went overseas, and then the Kohen and the daughter completed the marriage and did a nisuin. And the question was, could she eat truma? And the question came to Rav, and even though Rav was of the opinion that she should be allowed to, still v'chashla Rav l'had Rav Asi. Rav took concern for the opinion of Rav Asi and forbade her from eating truma. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says, Umode Rav would agree she'imesa eino yarsha. Even though Rav himself held that he himself held that she should be allowed to eat truma, which means we do assume them to be married, even though the father's not there to approve it. But Rav would agree that if she would die, if this girl would die, eina yarsha, the husband would not inherit her. Because uki mamona b'cheskes mari. Because we would say that we establish again this idea of chazaka, we assume that the money is in the chazaka, in the possession of its owner. In other words, when it comes to this scenario where she died, so if she only had erisin, if there's just betrothal, so then a husband does not inherit his wife's property if she dies, or I should say his fiance. If there's just a betrothal, so then he does not inherit her. If there's just erisin, he doesn't inherit her if she dies. If there's nisuin, or if they're fully married, so then he does inherit her. So the question is, how do we look at this? Where the father accepted Kiddushin, there's a full erisin here, there's a full betrothal, but then the father left town, and then they went and got married, nisuin, and then she died. So does the husband inherit her possessions in that case? Is that nisuin or not? So the Gemara says, even though Rav said she's allowed to eat truma, which seems to mean it's nisuin, but Rav would agree that the husband does not inherit her. We don't look at it as nisuin, because we don't know if there is, and we have a chezkas mama, we have a chazaka, wherever the money is, that's where we assume it belongs until we can prove that it should move. So it's currently in her possession. It kind of says, prove to me that you were married in order to inherit, and we can't prove that they're married. Maybe I guess if the father would come back and approve of the marriage, I'm not sure what would be in that case. But not sure what would happen if the father would come back and approve it. But at least if we don't have the father coming back to approve it, then we assume that there's no marriage, and the husband cannot inherit this girl. But yet, at the same time, we assume her to be married with regards to allowing her to eat truma. But that's also because, like we've said before, really she is allowed to eat truma by Torah law. Once she's betrothed, already she can eat truma. So we're not so concerned to now say that even though midirabanan, as an arusa, as someone who's betrothed, the rabbis forbade her to eat truma, but now that there might be a nisuin, we'll allow her to eat truma. But we will not allow him to inherit her if she dies. Okay. The Gemara has another case. Niskadsha ledas, v'nisei shalo ledas, v'aviyaka. So, a very similar case, except for one difference. So, the Kiddushin was with the father's agreement. and the marriage is without her father's agreement. But the one difference is, in this case, the father is not overseas, he's here. He's here in the city. So the father allowed her to accept Kiddushin. He approved the Kiddushin from this man. Then she went with this man and they did a Nisuin. And the father never expressed approval or disapproval. But he's here, he's around. He's just not saying anything. So what do we do in that case? Do we assume them to be married or not? Can she eat truma if this man is a Kohen? So Rav Huna Amar Eina Ocheles. Rav Huna says she's not allowed to eat truma. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Ocheles. And Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba said she is allowed to eat truma. What are they arguing about? Rav Huna Amar Eina Ocheles. Rav Huna says she can't eat truma. Vafilu l'Rav de Amar Ocheles. Even Rav, who said that in the case where the father went overseas, she's allowed to eat truma. Hasamu de lo isei la'av. That's because the father wasn't around. So we'll assume that he approves until he comes back and protests. Aval hacha de isei la'av. But here where he's in town, hai de ishtik mirsach rasach. If he's being quiet, if he's giving us the silent treatment, the way to interpret that is that he's very angry about this. And so Rav Huna says that by the father not saying anything, we have his answer. He disapproves. He's mad. And therefore, it's not a Nisuin. And therefore, she's not allowed to eat truma even if the man was a Kohen. That's the opinion of Rav Huna. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Ocheles. She's allowed to eat. And he says, Vafilu Rav Asi Damar Eino Ocheles. And even according to Rav Asi, he goes the other way, and he says, even according to Rav Asi, who said that when the father goes overseas, she's not allowed to eat truma. That's because he might come and protest. So Rav Asi was concerned that when the father comes back, he might protest, the whole thing will be cancelled, and it'll turn out that she's eating truma l'mafreya. She's really a zara, she's really not married to a Kohen, and she's eating truma be'isr, in a prohibited fashion. Aval hacha, but here, where the father's in town, midishasik, from the fact that he's not saying anything, isnuchi isnachale, it shows that he's okay with it. He approves. If he cared, he would say something. If he's not saying anything, it must be that he approves. So we have a machlokas, we have a dispute between Rav Huna and Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, how to interpret the father's silence in the case where he's in town. Rav Huna said if his silence means he's upset, he's angry, he does not approve of this, and therefore they're not married and she's not allowed to eat truma. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says that no, his silence actually is an expression of his approval, and therefore she is allowed to eat truma. Okay. What if, says the Gemara, one more case, 5 lines from the bottom, Niskadsha shelo l'dasavia v'nise shelo l'dasavia. What if she accepted Kiddushin without her father's agreement, and went ahead and got a Nisuin, consummated the marriage without her father's approval? So, up till now we've been talking about cases where the father approved of Kiddushin but didn't approve of Nisuin. What if he didn't approve of either of them? She did it on her own. Little 11-year-old girl decided she's ready to get married, and someone approached her, gave her Kiddushin, she accepted it. They went and got themselves a chuppah, they got Nisuin. So, and the father never said anything. He never approved it. Vavia kan, but he's in town. He's just being silent about it. How do we interpret that? So Rav Huna Amar Ocheles. Rav Huna says that if the husband is a Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma. We consider them married. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Eino Ocheles. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says she may not eat. So they just flipped. In this case, in the previous case, where the father approved of the Kiddushin, but not of the Nisuin, and he was there in town, Rav Huna said that you're not allowed to eat, because if he's being quiet, it must be that he's angry, so she's not married and she can't eat truma. And Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba said that she is allowed to eat truma because if the father is quiet, it must be that he approves. In this case, we have that the father never approved of either the Kiddushin or the Nisuin, at least not verbally. We don't know that he approves, but he's being silent. And here they flip. Rav Huna says that she may eat Truma. Apparently we don't assume that he's angry. And Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says she may not eat Truma. So what's going on here? So Amar Ula says, Hadir Rav Huna kechometz l'shinayim u'ka'ashem la'inayim. Ula says Rav Huna's opinion is like, he quotes a pasuk, but he says it's like vinegar to my teeth and smoke in my eyes. It doesn't make any sense. It bothers me. Why? Because now hold on, he says, Uma hasam de kiddushay da'araisa amartelo achla. In the first case, we had a Kiddushin midoraisa. We had the father approved of the Kiddushin. That's a Kiddushin doraisa. That's a Torah level Kiddushin. Then she went and got a Nisuin without the father, without knowing approval from the father. That we don't have midoraisa. And yet, Rav Huna said even though we had a doraisa Kiddushin, we said the lo achla, she's not allowed to eat. Hacha lo kol shekain. Here, wouldn't we say all the more so? Where you don't even have a deraisa kiddushin here, the father didn't approve of either step, either the kiddushin or the nisuin. So why would Rav Huna now turn around and say, here she's allowed to eat truma? Wouldn't you say all the more so she shouldn't eat truma? So the Gemara says, and Ula continues and he says, Nirin divrei Talmud. I think Rabbi Yirmiyah is right. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was a student of, he was a Talmud, he was a student of Rav Huna. Ula says, I think Rabbi Yirmiyah is right. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who's saying that in this case she can't eat, that makes more sense. So Amar Rava, so Rava said, My taima de Rav Huna. What is the reasoning of Rav Huna? Why does Rav Huna flip and say that in this case, even though you don't even have a Kiddushin midoraisa, still she's married and she's allowed to eat truma? Says Rava, Hoel v'naseh b'maisa yisoma b'chayav. The reason is because the father did an act of making her an orphan while he was still alive. In other words, we had this expression in a different scenario where the father actually marries her off completely and she has a nisuin. So that's like becoming an orphan in his life because that cuts her off from him. Meaning at that point she's out of his domain, even if her husband dies, once she has a full nisuin, even though she's a child. That's where we saw this expression before. Here it's being used slightly differently. The father is making her into a living orphan, so to speak. How? By not saying anything. Because by not saying anything, he is either saying, I waive my rights to have an opinion about this, or he's approving of it. So says Rava to explain Rav Huna, in the case where the father expressed an opinion about the Kiddushin, he approved of it. So then you could say, that he approves of. But now he's being silent, he must reject it, he must be angry, he doesn't approve of the Nisuin. That's where you have a different reaction at the two different steps. When you have a different reaction, you'll say the first, he approved of that, but if he's silent here, he must not approve, he must be angry. But if he's silent throughout, then he must that will interpret differently. That will interpret as approval, or at least of like, throwing up his hand saying, go ahead, do what you want. And if that's the case, so in that case, Rav Huna says that she is indeed allowed to eat truma, because at that point the father's waived his rights, or he's approved, and so it's we assume it to be a good kiddushin and nisuin, and she would be allowed to eat truma in that case. And the opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah in this case was that if there's no approval whatsoever, then she cannot eat. In the first case, where the father approved of the kiddushin, so there Rabbi Yirmiyah said, if he approves of the kiddushin, then even if he's silent on the second half, but he probably approves of that too. His silence is approval. But here, where he's silent throughout, here Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, silence throughout means he does not approve it, and so Rabbi Yirmiyah said that she would not be allowed to eat truma if the husband was a kohen, and Rav Huna maintains in this case that she is allowed to eat truma. Alright, thanks so much for listening. We will continue from here next time in Mir Tzashem.